This is Keys to the Shop, episode 114, The New Rules of Coffee, with Jordan Michaelman and Zachary Carlsen, founders of Sprudge.com. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and I'm excited to have you along today because we're talking to two of our industry's icons, the founders of the world's #1 coffee media outlet, Sprudge.com. And we're going to be talking about their new book that has officially launched and is available wherever books are sold. That is The New Rules of Coffee. It's a really great conversation, and I'm totally honored to have them on the show. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima is a specialty coffee equipment supplier based out of Louisville, Kentucky. And since they began their company, their goal has been to provide the best coffee brewing equipment that is available to both the general public and professionals alike. They curate the best equipment for every need, and they have everything that your cafe needs. Large equipment from grinders to espresso machines and under-counter refrigeration to pour-over setups and beyond. Pretty much anything you can think of. They put such a big emphasis on having the expertise to help their customers get the right gear to fit every situation. So go to prima-coffee.com. That's prima-coffee.com and see how they can help you outfit your cafe or even your home with the right equipment to produce wonderful coffee. And my thanks to Prima for their support of Keys to the Shop. Today's episode is also brought to you by Pacific Foods. They are the folks behind the Pacific Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages, and those are designed specifically for professional baristas and the standards for excellence that they demand. So you could be talking about almond, soy, coconut, rice, or even oat milk, their newest product, and its ability to take the heat from steaming, produce a really great silky texture, and keep the flavor balance focused on coffee. It makes it a perfect choice for your cafe's menu. Of course, Pacific has always been a supporter of specialty coffee. These products are just evidence of that, giving customers delicious non-dairy options in the cafe. And I would highly encourage you to make this part of your cafe's menu. Go to pacificfoods.com, that's pacificfoods.com, and learn more about the Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages and how they can really elevate the non-dairy offerings in your cafe. Thank you very much to Pacific for their support of Keys to the Shop. Okay, so today we are talking about the new rules of coffee. It's a new book that's come out by the founders of Sprudge, Jordan Michaelman and Zachary Carlsen. If you're in specialty coffee, chances are you know who Sprudge is and you know their work. But in case you don't, Sprudge.com is the world's #1 specialty coffee media outlet. Since 2009, Sprudge has been publishing original features highlighting coffee culture, news, and events with a network of over 70 writers around the world. They cover the latest and greatest in coffee, from news, from new cafe openings in cities worldwide to unique specialized programs and events. They interview the world's leading chefs, baristas, bartenders, entrepreneurs, small business owners, artists, and cafe owners, and they highlight the best in architectural and product design, while publishing original content and breaking content daily from an international team of talented professional photographers, writers, and illustrators. They've been featured in publications worldwide, from the New York Times, Wired, BuzzFeed, The New Yorker, New York Magazine, Eater. There's just a lot more. Jordan Michaelman's background is in writing and journalism. Zachary is a specialty coffee veteran with a ton of professional cafe experience. And since the day they founded Sprudge until now, they've acquired so much knowledge and perspective on the industry. And that is what is distilled into these rules in the book, The New Rules of Coffee. It's a wonderful book that's both approachable and also at times challenging. And it especially functions as an amazing book for people who are into coffee but aren't necessarily professionals. And I think we have a lot to learn from a book like this and from what Zachary and Jordan write, especially in the way that they write about it in the book. And we get into detail about the mission and vision behind this book, some of the rules and the 4 sections that make up this book and the rules that are contained in those sections. Just a great conversation with two guys who have done such a world of good for specialty coffee. I'm just really thankful for their work at Sprudge and also for this book and what it will do for coffee consumers all over the world. So I'm really honored and pleased to present to you my conversation with the founders of Sprudge.com and the authors of the New Rules of Coffee book, Jordan Michaelman and Zachary Carlsen. Jordan and Zachary, welcome to Keys to the Shop. I'm honored to have you on the show.
We're happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. It's fun for us to be on the show. We're excited to be here with you.
I hear this is the first day of the book launch. The book launch happens today, right?
That's correct. Yes, today is the book came out yesterday, and today is the first little event that we're doing for it. We're speaking to you from Olympia, Washington, here in the American Pacific Northwest. And tonight we'll have that book launch party at Olympia Coffee Roasting Company in downtown Olympia.
And your tour goes all over the U.S., right? It's going all through December, like the November, December dates have yet to be released, but all through the month of October, you're kind of booked.
Indeed, that's correct. Yes, from here in Olympia, we'll head on up to Tacoma, Washington, the land of my birth, and where Zachary and I first met each other when we were kids. And we'll have an event there at a lovely bookstore called King's Books. Then on Friday, we'll be in Everett, Washington, with Maxwell Mooney at his Narrative Coffee. Then later that evening at the La Marzocco Cafe in Seattle. And then back down to Portland, where our company is based, for an event with Stumptown Coffee. And yeah, from there, we've got events on the East Coast, and then a bunch more stuff that's getting ready to get announced for a little bit later on in the fall, heading towards the holidays.
Awesome. Congratulations right up front. This is just an amazing book. I got an advanced copy, and going through it, I think in an email I was saying, I feel like this book is kind of in book form what I feel like a good cafe should be for a consumer. It's like challenging and approachable all at the same time.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, approachability and accessibility is definitely what we're going for with this new book.
So now, we're talking about Sprudge, which is the world's #1 coffee media outlet, and this is a lot of pressure for somebody to write a book. And when you're talking about putting just 55 rules into a book, I'm sure there can be endless rules for coffee. How does the mission of Sprudge fit into this small book? Over the years, as you've grown, I'm sure you want to infuse this with your vision and mission for your company. So how do we read that through this book?
I think that some of the initial concept behind the book that has been sort of honed and fleshed out through our work with the really wonderful editors and team at 10 Speed Press, our publishers. The idea was to kind of say, well, we've been reporting on coffee every day for the better part of a decade, and we're going to kind of dish everything we've learned to you in a digestible book form. And so some of the stuff that's in the book, if you have been reading us every day or are familiar with us or are a follower of the site, you may kind of see like, oh, I've seen them talk about Kopi Luwak before, or I've seen them talk about, being in cafes before.
Their love of mochas.
Yeah. They've been really into mochas before. Yeah, exactly. So, some of it is kind of trying to say we've been doing this really drilled down, granular micro reporting on coffee every day for a decade. And the book was to take a more of an elevated view of like, here's the basics. Like, let's chapter this out into 50 or 55 things that we like kind of want to talk about and think people would benefit from knowing.
Professionals can get some benefit from this, and I think we'll talk a little bit about specifically how later, but I think it seems like a consumer's entry into specialty coffee, and that was the goal of the book, was it not?
Yeah, for sure. Walking that line between pros and consumers is something that we've spent a lot of time trying to learn how to do effectively for how we publish every day on Sprudge. And it comes back to a lot of kind of fundamental things for making it clear that we don't speak for the industry, making it clear that, we don't expect you to have a ton of previous knowledge to be able to jump in on a story. We talk a lot about trying to be able to publish for our parents and our families, just in how we publish the website every day so that people don't feel disincluded. But for the book, I think our hope is that there's certainly stuff in this that coffee professionals will enjoy, or little inside jokes and references that pay off knowing a ton about coffee. But more than anything, we hope that this is something that, like, if you make coffee for a living or you love coffee, you can give this book to, like, your brother or your parents, or like maybe somebody you just went on a date with, and be like, this is like a capsule version of what I do.
What is it that, or how did you go about choosing what to put in this book? Being that you've had such a detailed view of the industry for so long, and now you're taking this elevated 30,000 foot view of specialty coffee, what does that process of editing out and including look like?
I believe like it first started with a brainstorm with the two of us, just like coming up with as many ideas for rules that we could think of, and just like throwing stuff on the wall. And I mean, I think at one point we probably maybe had like 80 things on the list, and like some of them were ridiculous, but a lot of them were like, what are things that are obvious to us because we've worked in coffee or written about coffee for a decade, but maybe not obvious to someone who's enjoyed coffee their entire life. And like the first rule, like coffee is a fruit. When the book came out, our landlord at our office saw that, and she was like, "Oh, I didn't know coffee was a fruit." And so it's kind of like the perfect, like, yes, like we did it. But like the first part was brainstorming, like just a bunch of crazy ideas. Do you remember, Jordan, what like some of the crazier things were on that list?
Oh, I don't know. I think a lot of it kind of got dialed into some of the other kinds of stuff that ended up being in the book. That honing and editing process, especially early on in the book, was where working with the team that we worked with at 10 Speed was so huge, and their oversight and guidance to be able to say, well, listen, we're consumers, we're informed consumers, because we like work at a food and beverage publishing company and we like to drink coffee and stuff, but like really, at the baseline of this, we want to try to come at this like a little bit like we're your audience. So specifically, the women that we worked with at 10 Speed, Ann Goldberg and Emily Timberlake, were huge in the upfront of this book to help us hone and whittle and get a sense of like what needs to be in this thing versus like what stuff that's maybe like a sentence, but it's not a total rule.
Right.
That's awesome that it was just kind of built in beta testing group as your editors. So you're starting the book out with some challenging information, not challenging like, actually just it's challenging to know that, coffee is a fruit. It's a global product, and it has a history of colonialism, rules 1, 2, and 3, respectively. I mean, can you talk more about why it's important that the reader be met with those rules right off the bat, and why start out there?
There's maybe a couple of different ways to think about how to answer a question like that. I mean, I think the really honest one is to say that it was important to us that if we were going to have an opportunity to have a platform like a book, with a company like 10 Speed Press and Penguin Random House, that we wanted to make sure that we use that platform for some kind of good. And I think that can mean occasionally having uncomfortable conversations about the sort of narrative scope of where coffee comes from and how we understand it. And so that's important. I also think that we're just kind of fascinated by maps in history and how products get to us and how we consume them and stuff. And the more you learn about coffee or other kinds of products that we consume and taste good, the more you sort of realize that you're an actor in a chain that in some cases stretches back many hundreds of years and has some dark chapters in it. And there are whole books that are written on this, and we reference in the third rule Mark Pendergrass's Uncommon Grounds, which is like the master work on the history of colonialism and coffee and that sort of narrative of how coffee got to where it is around the world. And for us, we wanted to try to be able to just provoke a little bit of thought, like before we get into the fun stuff of like cafes and like some brewing tips and all that kind of stuff, just to provoke the thought a little bit for people to be able to say, like, this is part of what we're talking about. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. If you'd like to learn more, here's a place to start. And that was hopefully the goal. It felt like it was important to do, and it's some of the stuff that came kind of early in the process of us saying, like, this is an important thing that we want to try to talk about.
Yeah. I recently went out to a really nice restaurant here in Portland, and it was like several courses, and the server could tell us where every piece of produce came from, and could tell you the farmer's name, could tell you where the wine was grown, and tell you about the wine grower. And then when the coffee came out at the end, when I asked where is this coffee from, they were like, oh, it's roasted here in Portland. And I was like, well, that's great, but like, but where is the coffee originally from? And they had no idea. They couldn't answer. They were like, well, I don't know. It's local. And I was like, okay, great. Well, so like having these first like 3 chapters, like, hey, coffee is grown around the world. This is where it grows. Is important.
And I think that naturally leads into, setting it up to say, so not only does coffee grow around the world, and not only is the reason why it grows around the world sort of complicated and at times challenging and like a little bit dark, but like here in 2018, the people who are growing it now around the world are artisans. And so let's talk about that too. Like, it sets you up to get to that next part, which like is arguably the even more, I mean, the history stuff is fascinating, but like this next part of it of everything that's happening now in coffee and the big leaps in quality that are happening in coffee, like you have to have that part to get to that next part,
Yeah, it humanizes this the end of the value chain, because it does seem people are encouraged to simplify their view of coffee by marketing, and making quick decisions at the counter does seem like the goal of a lot of marketers in coffee. So having a little bit of a more in-depth conversation about the human behind that coffee, it takes time, and I'm super glad that was something that you started out with. And especially the one, rule number 6, we're talking about the first section of 4. You have coffee around the world, coffee at home, rules for the cafe, and a new coffee future. And in that first section, you go on to talk about the people at origin that are making their own coffee for themselves to drink. And that's not always been the case. And I think some people might find that really incredible to think about.
Yeah, this is one of the things for when we talk about like what are some early ideas in the book that got cut or honed a little bit. I think at one point we were maybe going to have, Sprudge recommends these cafes in New York or in Melbourne or in London or whatever. And we ended up kind of walking that back and saying, well, that's really hard because by the time the book comes out, you never know what's going to be open or whatever. So if we're going to try to stick the spot and say, well, we're going to recommend some places, let's have it like tie back into some of the bigger points that we're trying to make and make it really count. And so that's why, the only cafes that are specifically recommended, by city and name in the book are these cafes at Origin. And that is definitely something that for us to get to show that to people, we've been trying to do just in how we publish all the time on Sprudge. We're regularly running content from contributors in Brazil and from contributors around the world who are writing about these really world-class cafes that are in traditionally coffee producing countries. And so that's one of those sort of things where like we've done it we're doing it dozens and dozens of times for how we publish in the course of a normal week or month on Sprudge. So let's sort of macro that out as a chapter in the book.
So the reader leaves this chapter or this section of Coffee Around the World with a bigger view of something that they may have sort of taken for granted. Consuming coffee now is a global thing for them. And they take that knowledge and they want to make good coffee at home. And that's the next section. Can you talk a little bit about, this is a substantial section. What is the importance of coffee at home for the success of specialty coffee?
I think one of the big things that we wanted to talk about is the fact that you really don't need fancy equipment to brew good coffee at home. And you just need a couple of things that maybe cost $200 altogether to have like a setup at home that's similar to what you can find at a really nice cafe. As far as I'm talking about drip coffee here. That was important for us because I feel like a lot of people have this idea that you need like the $300 all-in-one grinder brewer contraption to brew really good coffee, and that we all know that that's just not the case. And there are brewing apparatuses that you could buy that are under $20 that are going to give you some really nice coffee that go on to win brewers' cups and barista competitions worldwide. Jordan spent a great deal of time on this particular section of the book.
Yeah, it's true. There's some stuff in this book that's really personal. I don't know if it super presents as that because we've tried to kind of make it as mass accessible as we possibly can. But the brewing coffee at home thing, that baseline of advice for coffee brewing at home is something that I have spent a ton of time having sort of unexpectedly impactful conversations about with my family, I have two older brothers, and then with my mom, and my father passed away just recently, but with my mom and dad, back in the beginning of the site, like trying to be like, we can't have the big brewer thing. Like it having a grinder built in is not a value add. Like we can't, the scoop is not, and God bless my dad, but I never got through to him on this, but like the scoop is not the same as the scale. Like, let's just have a little scale, like some of this kind of stuff, it comes a little bit from like a place of utility because like I got to go home and hang out. So like I would like to have the coffee situation not be a house of horrors. But it's also like, because you love them and you want them to like drink good things, so you sort of hit on this thing eventually of being like, let's just get you like the entry Barazza, the entry Bonavita, like whatever little gram scale you can get. Like it can cost $10. You don't have to like ball out on like the barista standard one. Like you don't need the Akaya or whatever. We can get you like a little gram scale. It's fine. And like some cleaning tablets, you know what I mean? And like that's kind of it. Like if we Amazon shop it and get deals, like we can do it for $200 and you will be able to make like repeatable, easy coffee every morning for yourself that will taste good. And it almost becomes like a duty. Like they're the family of the person who, co-founded Sprudge. They shouldn't be drinking, crap in the morning. Like, like, come on. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, is that those chapters about making coffee at home are the fruits of like an ongoing conversation with people in our lives who aren't coffee professionals, but who like coffee, would like to drink good coffee, and just need to get like enabled to do that. It's sort of an unexpectedly kind of personal part of the book.
I find that it has to be kind of their idea. Yes, in some ways you bring it up and then they have this idea that they're going to buy into it, but overdo it and then it's completely rejected and it's back to the K-cup.
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. The biggest hang up is the scale. The scale is the thing when you're talking to like baby boomer average coffee drinker or whatever. Once you start being like, and then you put it on the scale, their eyes glaze over and they think you're crazy. They're like, you're gonna weigh the coffee on a scale? And I think the way to maybe try to talk about it, and we talk about this in the book, is to say like, well, you're following a recipe. It's like baking. Like it's just like baking a cake. Like you need to know if you have 2 cups of sugar or 2.5 cups of sugar or 1.5 cups of sugar, because it makes a really big difference for what you're baking, right? Like, right? We all kind of agree. Okay, well, so like those units of measurement also make a really big deal for the cup of coffee that you're brewing. Indeed, like people that do this stuff for a living are obsessed with trying to dial in those variables and make them perfect and replicable. And so you can spend like $10, like any head shop gram scale. I don't know if you have those in Kentucky, but any head shop gram scale is fine. Like you don't have to spend $100 and buy like the nice one. Like you can just do with whatever. It's fine, But it's such an important thing, and it's the weirdest sort of psychic gap between people who are coffee nerds and the rest of the world to be like, just use a scale.
Yeah.
I don't totally know why.
Yeah, something they just can't scale. Sorry for that joke.
That's fine. I'm kind of thinking this would be a good story. This would be a good like standalone Sprudge story of like why do y'all hate scales? Like what's the problem? What's the problem with scales?
Get a man on the street interview. Yeah. I do think that the tone of that section in particular has this. It has a tension between here are some ratios for success, and also, even though they're being called rules, they're not necessarily, capital R rules. Like a lot of people might look for those and say, just give me the recipe and I'll just do it over and over again. But then there's a lot of room given for personal preference. And I imagine that obviously is intentional.
Yeah, the rules construct is something that definitely we tailored some of the nature of this project to what the folks at 10 Speed Press were looking for. In 2017, they put out a lovely little book called The New Wine Rules that's written by a guy called John Benet. He's an editor at Punch magazine, which is like an online cocktail and wine website. He was for many years the wine critic for the San Francisco Chronicle. And that format, the books are really different. It's sort of not part of the same edition necessarily or part of a series, but the starting out concepts are kind of from the same DNA. And so our take on what is or isn't a rule, some of that is trying to kind of fit this concept that the book got like at least initially structured around.
Sure. So rule 28, I want to talk about coffee as a love language. Can you elaborate on that one? What do you mean by love language? How does that play out with consumers?
When people talk about like a love language, it's sort of just a way of like saying how you express love. It comes from this idea of like love languages in relationships. So receiving gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, and physical touch. This idea that like within a relationship, there's all of these different ways that people express like love to each other. And I think that within that concept, some of those things like receiving gifts or quality time or acts of service can kind of get expressed in making coffee for people. This is again another thing that like I think is oddly kind of personal in this book. These are all things that we've done. Like the chapter talks about brewing a pot together over a stack of newspapers, or making a cup of coffee for your partner when they get home from work, or like, I know, Zachary, like this is something in like your relationships you've had experiences with. There's a little note in this about saying like, for partners with a new baby, brewing coffee is an act of mercy and kindness. Well, like when this book was being written, I had a like a 9-month-old baby at home. So like that's, you know what I mean? So like there's some of that kind of stuff. And yeah, coffee surfs along with us in our relationships. And I mean, not to kind of be too like, on the nose about it or whatever, but like it's something that you make in the morning. And so like it's something that you're having with the person whom you're sharing your morning with, which implies a level of intimacy and relationship that coffee kind of weaves its way into, you know?
This is a terrible segue, but I was going to say that my my grandmother brews the best coffee. She uses pre-ground coffee in a freezer, and for the holidays when I go to her house, her brewing coffee and serving coffee is like my favorite thing. Yes. And the last Christmas that I spent with her, she had counterculture coffee that had been pre-ground and frozen for maybe a year, but it was some of the best coffee, and she's so sweet. She keeps her coffees on like these little plug-in heaters, and if she sees that your mug of coffee is half full, she'll ask if she could microwave it for you to heat it back up, and it's just like the cutest, sweetest thing. But I would never tell her to read these new rules of coffee and to change anything she does, because whatever she's doing, it's perfect, and no. It's an act of love. You know?
Yeah, so sometimes a cup of coffee is not just a cup of coffee, you know, like it really can be an act of love, and like a very sort of personal and intimate thing that we do together with our families and loved ones. It's dug into how we live in this very kind of intimate way, if you think about it. And so trying to capture that, you know, I don't think it's a whole book, but we wanted it to be a chapter in this book.
I'm sure it could be a whole book. It's funny you're talking about this. I just put up a kind of a Instagram blog post about my grandmother's coffee and how she got me into coffee. And my mother brought me a cup of hers that no doubt I drink coffee, Folgers Maxwell House special, especially blended by her, over cigarettes while she smoked over a near an open window. It was a formative time, and it transcends the transactional nature that we find ourselves in with, sales and marketing, and trying to extract every sensory aspect out of the coffee and maybe forget the other sensory aspects of coffee. And I feel like some of that kind of bleeds over into the cafe. When people come to a cafe, it's like they have that instilled in them that this drink, it does have some kind of a communal value to it, and how we operate in cafes has a big impact on how people view coffee, because we can earn their trust or not. And I think that's where the section rules for the cafe is so important. One of the aspects of having a trust-based relationship, let's say, with your barista is that they treat you well. And I like Rule 35 and 36. A snotty barista trope is real for a reason and is also dying. Can you elaborate on the truths behind those rules?
Yeah, this is something that Zachary, because of your kind of career and working in cafes, before we started Sprudge, and even in the early years of us publishing the site, that some of that stuff is in the DNA of how we publish. And I think it really, that experience that you have, Zachary, with that perspective of work was a really big part of this section of the book. So maybe you can speak to that a little more.
Yeah. I started working as a barista in 2003 at Starbucks Coffee, and then moved to Murky Coffee in 2005. I traveled a lot during that time and went to a lot of different cafes. And 2005, I feel like, was a very special year in specialty coffee. It was like a time when no espresso to go was like a big thing. No, no 20-ounce sizes. That was a rule that it was done to kind of show that this was a specialty cafe like that doesn't believe in high volume products. We want specialty products that are small and special, and we want you to enjoy them. There was all of these ideas going around at the time, and they were all good intentioned, good hearted, and I definitely told people no espresso to go. You have to enjoy it here so many times in the different cafes that I worked at. And looking back on that now, I wished I could have maybe done it a little bit different. But I mean, I'm not saying that if there are cafes that are still not serving espresso to go, like, go for it. That's great. But
around that time, we were calling it service with a sneer, and we weren't trying to be ironic about it. It was just the way it was.
Exactly. It was just a different time, and I feel like cafes now have gotten a little less sneery and a little more smiley. Maybe, or just maybe not smiley, maybe just like a little less sneery and more approachable, more accessible. Uh, Meeting folks where they're at and trying to woo them into this new wave of coffee, but without alienating them or pushing them away. And I definitely pushed a lot of people away in the early years of me being a barista.
Yeah, it seems like that attitude functions the same way as the scale functions at home, where people glaze over. Like, I don't have time to deal with this barista's attitude, and so many people probably, not to heap salt on the wound there, because I've done it too, but say, well, specialty coffee is not for me. And how many people did we lose to specialty coffee because of well-intentioned and maybe not always well-intentioned decisions about coffee quality versus satisfying the customer.
Right. Yeah.
Just as I guess another thought on that, though, I also think you can kind of say that like the snotty barista going away means that the snotty barista won. Like, they're part of why that thing was a thing, the snotty barista trope, was because in 2005, serving coffee like how you were serving, Chris, or how you were serving, Zachary, y'all were so far out on a ledge, like so far out ahead of what has since become, like, undeniably, like, the defining beverage trend of the last decade in America and around the world, the rise of these third wave cafes. Like, you were early adopters, which meant that people didn't get it. Like, and that can create this environment where you have like young, ambitious, smart people who know they're doing good work and who know what they're making is good. And when people come in, they're like, why isn't this $1? Because that's what they're used to. And like, you almost can't help but end up with this, like, well, it's us against the world kind of a mentality. Like, it's totally understandable. And I think that the fact that that's gone away now has a ton to do with the fact that, like, it says in this chapter 36, like, it says, delicious coffee is becoming more ubiquitous and thus more normalized. When you're the first quality focused coffee bar in town, it can be hard to get people to respect you. But when there are 5 shops just like yours on the same street, people are going to approach what you're doing from a place of familiarity. And I really strongly, just as an observer, like, I never worked in cafes, I've always just been a customer, but like, that rings true to me. Like, I think that that's how it's happened.
Oh, that's a great point. Never quite thought of it that way. So now that we have sort of a evolved sense of how we interact with customers, and customers have an evolved sense of what they can expect from a specialty product, a lot more so today than in 2005. The way that we also can alienate people is the way that the menu looks, and you've decided through like Rule 44 to try to deconstruct the menu a little bit. Like, tell me the process that you used, because it's not like lines, there's no dotted lines that say so many ounces, and you're also questioning the existence of a flat white in this chapter too, so I'm interested in that as well.
It's the coffee bar menu is so interesting because it's different wherever you go. It's different in different parts of the United States. It's definitely different around the world. A cappuccino is what I really want to do one day is open a cafe that just serves cappuccino, but like 8 different kinds that are like the Northwest style or the San Francisco 1996 style,
Brilliant.
the Australian style. Because like they are all different, and which one is the most authentic one? Like that, the one from Italy, maybe. So like it was important for us to like just be very basic about the construction of these drinks, and so that's why ounces are out the window, because it really depends on where you are in the world. A cappuccino might be 6 ounces. It could be 16 ounces. So just kind of like taking the most ubiquitous drink menu items and then having Kelsey illustrate them was kind of the way we went about it.
These are beautiful illustrations. As an aside, the book is gorgeous.
Thank you.
Good job, Kelsey. And so the flat white kind of falls into that category you're just talking about. Like, everyone's definition of it is, well, maybe now more aligned with what they get at Starbucks now that they've included it in their menu, which has kind of reopened the scab for a lot of baristas.
Right.
So
yeah, we're trying to figure out at all these book events where we'll be reading different chapters from the book, and I'm trying to decide if I want to have the flat white chapter be one of the ones that I read.
Yeah, get people riled up just a tad.
Definitely.
In the end of this section, how do you want the reader to perceive the cafe and the barista?
Gosh, the cafes themselves are doing so much work to create those environments and to communicate stuff to their guests, and we would never, like, we're simply an echo of that. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's all that kind of wonderful work that's being done out there every day. So I really don't think that our book or any book can step in and claim to be changing hearts and minds or impacting people's perceptions the same way going to a lovely cafe in your city or town and having a nice experience there can truly inform that. I think that, more than anything, our hope is to give those experiences a little bit of context, or perhaps enable folks to appreciate them with just another like kind of layer of understanding. But that all comes back to the cafes themselves and the baristas. We remain ardent cafe lovers and cafe goers here. A decade into publishing Sprudge, we go to cafes every day. It's still magic. We still love it, and I think that that's the ultimate sort of way that hopefully points people towards, if they're reading it, is to make them want to go, to make them want to keep going, go back.
What about coffee in general, in the customers or the consumer's view of it, and the way that this book is constructed? There's a mindset that you want people to sort of have about this product that you feel is going to be more helpful for the success of the industry and maybe their success in enjoying this product. What is that goal?
Like, one of the goals is to say, like, you like coffee, you're reading this book about coffee. We say drink what you want to drink. Like, why not? It's like, drink what you think is delicious. But here are all of the reasons why coffee is delicious. Maybe it'll encourage people to try different things. But like we don't want people who really enjoy a hazelnut flavored iced coffee to feel alienated when reading this book, and we don't want them to feel like the hazelnut iced coffee is a bad drink to drink, because it's a delicious drink to drink.
Yeah.
And
From time to time.
From time to time, why not? But go ahead, Jordan.
Oh, I was just gonna say we talked a lot in the kind of thinking through like who we wanted this book to be for. We kept talking about like the guy or the gal 2 cubicles over from you in the office who like has like a life doesn't start before coffee mug and like is always at the coffee counter and just really loves coffee a lot. We don't want anything in this book to alienate him or her. Actually, we want everything in this book to like justify their life choices, loving coffee, and like be the perfect like office gift that you give them. Like, if we can sneak some like third wave coffee nerd stuff into that, then that's great. Like if we can teach a little bit or like make you think of it in a big global context a little bit, like that's great. But ultimately it should be a pleasurable book to read for anyone who loves coffee, whether that's kind of the like don't talk to me before I've had my coffee t-shirt person, or it's like people who listen to Keys to the Shop who are like very knowledgeable and like likely work around coffee professionally. Like so that's a real tightrope to walk to try to make something that like can go in both those directions. And we're checking the Amazon reviews to see if we've succeeded.
Oh, right on. How's that going? Is it so far so
Well,
good?
I don't read the reviews.
Zachary does. Zachary's assistant clips the best parts for him, and he looks every Monday in a folder.
Hey,
I'm joking. That's not actually what happened. But we've gotten a couple reviews. It's actually doing good on Amazon. We have been watching to see how it's done. There was this kombucha book that was #1 like last week, and then we were like #3, and we finally passed the kombucha book, which was very exciting. So yeah, that stuff is going. They tell us well.
Excellent. So, as a professional, and a lot of us in the audience are, coffee shop professionals, what do you want us to learn from this that will help us be better professionals for the customer's benefit, for our career's benefit?
Man, I don't know if that's totally what we want. What we would rather have happen is like there's going to be stuff if you're a professional, you can read this and be like, oh, that's interesting, or like, oh, that's I like or I don't like how they positioned that or whatever. But like really what we would like you to do is sell this book to your customers who like have enough good sense to come to your coffee shop, but like probably don't know like that coffee starts as a fruit, or like if they do, they probably don't know like maybe all of the history, or like they don't know some of the other big kind of stuff. Like we more than anything else, we want this book to be something that like if you work in coffee, give this book as a gift like to people who don't know as much as you do, or like if you own a cafe, like stock this book for your customers because it's really for them more than it is for people who work in coffee every day. I think that there's stuff for people who work in coffee every day to enjoy here, and like especially if you have been reading us for a while and know our voice and stuff, this is sort of a new presentation of that voice. It's in a book context. It visually looks completely different because of like Kelsey Roten's vision for the illustrations for it and the team at 10 Speed's vision for the layout for it and stuff. It's all presented differently than what it's like to read Sprudge, but like it's not a training tool. This is not for you to teach your new staff. Like this is for you to sell to your customers, like people who know enough to come to you to drink coffee but don't know all the other stuff that's in the 165 pages or whatever it is for this book. Like that's who it's for.
Excellent. It seems like even if you had been teaching or talking about some of those things, it takes maybe a couple other voices from outside the cafe to confirm that indeed what the barista said about coffee being a fruit, or the coffee's history was true, and in maybe the third or fourth time they hear it, they're like, okay, I believe it now. So
the one thing, just flipping through though, that I would say is that if you ever have a customer who is doing the loud coffee, like the loud meeting in your cafe, you should bring them over a copy of the book and flip it to page, let me get it.
Is this the headphone rule?
Yeah, flip it to page 114, rule 39, that says please use your headphones. And be like, not only do we please request you do this, but like, here is a chapter in a book that tells you to please do this. So that maybe is the one direct application of the book that we would suggest using in a professional setting.
The last 2 weeks on bar, I've been noticing that for some reason, just everyone wants to play those videos without headphones, and it's just, for some reason, just started. I don't know. Maybe it's they know this book is coming out. They want to get it out while they can.
Yeah. We should blow up the 2 pages to like a wall print, and then people could just put it up in cafes.
Yeah, Department of Brewology would get on that.
And point to it, and be like, listen, like.
And point to it? I don't know.
That's right. Well, this is why
a laser pointer.
This is why I never worked in cafes, Zachary. It would have been a disaster. I would have been a disaster.
What the last section of the book is kind of the ultimate in sort of big picture, vision of coffee, the future, the new coffee future. What is the new coffee future look like from your vantage point, and how can coffee save the world?
Well, I think, I think we hope that it's inclusive. I think that we hope that it can stand up to hate and bigotry when it kind of comes into our lens and comes across our path in and around coffee. I think that we hope that it tastes good and connects that experience to the bigger picture of why things get to taste good in the first place, and who makes them, where it comes from. And we don't totally know. I mean, I think that that's something that's really fun to get to think about, what it looks like when you publish something on a blog. People can always go back and look at it, but the next day comes and you have to publish something else on that blog, But for a book is kind of forever, I mean, maybe if it's successful, you get to do a second edition of it or whatever, but what comes out in it is what comes out in it, and you think about it in a very different way, I think, as a content creator, as a writer. And so some of that kind of stuff to say, like, coffee can save the world, like, coffee gives us an opportunity to like rethink some of the stories for like how coffee came to be in the first place. We'll be really excited to see what that looks like in another 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, and who knows, maybe we'll get to write another book about it.
This has been a really fun conversation about this book. This book is fun. Like I said in the beginning, it's an easy read. It's both challenging and playful. I think everybody should read this book, honestly, and definitely stock the book as well. I would be interested in knowing how people can kind of follow you in the progress of your book tour and get in touch with you to maybe become a stockist of the book.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the kind words about it. It means a lot. So to follow stuff for the book tour and everything, definitely please just follow us at Sprudge on Instagram. And of course, cruise over to sprudge.com on the reg, because we'll be posting tour updates and new dates announced and kind of events and things around it throughout the next couple of months. For folks that are interested in stocking the book, we really appreciate the thought and interest. So get in touch with us. You can write to us at books@sprudge.com. That's books@sprudge.com. And we will get you set up with the team at Penguin Random House, and they will facilitate the sale and send books to you wherever you are so that you may sell them to your customers. So just give us a shout and we'll get the ball rolling for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on the show and writing this book. It's really fantastic. Thank you for all your thoughts, and the work you do with Sprudge is just invaluable. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris.
Well, I want to say thank you to Jordan and Zachary for joining me on the show. I really appreciate the work that they do. And I think this conversation really drilled home for me the importance of how we talk about coffee with our consumers in the cafe, especially. Earlier in the conversation, I mentioned how the gap between the shelf in the shop and the kitchen counter where coffee is made at home is kind of a big one, and a lot of people fail in making great coffee when they're using our products. And giving people this book, I think, is a great way to help them with making great coffee at home, but also reading this book as a professional, I think, will also help you take on what I feel like is a very helpful tone and methodology of explaining coffee. I think this book sets a very good example for those of us who want to win over people to the side of specialty coffee, both at home and in the cafe. And so thank you guys for this great book and the great conversation around it. Now, if you want the show notes for this episode, I would encourage you to go to keystotheshop.com, enter your email address in the sidebar, and then you will be signed up to receive the newsletter that features the show notes, which is the takeaways, the main takeaways from each conversation had on the show, and the resources and links mentioned in that conversation, along with news of upcoming events and speaking things and consulting for Keys to the Shop consulting and training. So go to keystotheshop.com, put your email address in, and it's as easy as that. If you want to reach out to me, you can do so by emailing chris@keystotheshop.com if you've got questions, comments, things that you need help with, or if you're interested in working with me directly to help train you or your staff in your cafe. Keys to the Shop Consulting is available to you for that. Let's have a conversation about it. You can just email me again, chris@keystotheshop.com. I can't wait to hear from you. And that's it for today's episode. Thanks for your time today. Go out, get this book, read it, buy it for some coffee-loving friends. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.